The new Calton watchtower was built in 1824. It served as a watchtower until 1832. It remains standing to this day, now boarded up, its purpose historical, its duty completed. Within its walls, men stood in the darkness and watched. They were not soldiers, they were not famous. But they were the Night Sentinels of Edinburgh, the guardians of the dead, the defenders of the violated, the witnesses who refused to look away. This is their story. Not the story of the criminals or the famous doctors, but the story of those who stood watch. And the towers remain as evidence that someone cared, someone stood, someone watched, and that made a difference. Edinburgh, 1827, a city terrified. Every night, families lie awake, wondering if their loved ones will remain in the ground come morning. Every fresh grave is a target. Every funeral is a countdown, not to rest, but to theft. And somewhere in the darkness, someone is watching. Not the body snatchers, someone else, someone hired to stand between the living and the dead, between grief and violation. They are the Night Sentinels. The resurrection men had made a calculation. A fresh corpse was worth more money than most Scottish labourers earned in 6 months. At 10 shillings per body, death had become an industry, and the industry was winning. Gravediggers were reporting empty coffins. Families were discovering chains cut and earth disturbed. The dead were disappearing. The living were losing their minds. The answer came in stone and iron. Between 1824 and 1826, Edinburgh's parishes made a decision that would define their response to the resurrection trade. They would build towers. High enough to see everything, strong enough to shelter a man through a winter night. The new Calton watchtower rose 3 stories, circular, crenellated like a fortress, because that's what a cemetery had become. His name was Thomas Begbie. He was hired in 1827, not because he was a soldier, not because he was trained in combat. He was hired because he needed work, and someone needed to watch the graves. For 10 shillings a week, Begbie would sit in the tower for 12 hours each night, watching for movement, for shadows, for the sound of spades striking earth. The first night was quiet, too quiet. Begbie sat in the tower, watching a graveyard that had known only violation for years, and nothing happened. The resurrection men were working elsewhere, or perhaps they knew the tower was new and were waiting to understand its patterns, its weaknesses. The silence was unnerving in a different way than the presence of crime would have been. Begbie was not alone for long. By late 1827, every major cemetery in Edinburgh had added watchtowers or hired night watches. St. Cuthbert's Kirkyard had its tower, Greyfriars had its watchers. The city was building what amounted to a defensive infrastructure against its own citizens. This was not normal policing. This was war, a war fought at night over corpses in the darkness beneath the city's respectable surface. A watchtower was only as effective as the man within it and the tools at his disposal. The equipment was simple but ingenious. Lanterns for seeing, bells for alarming, sometimes pistols for defense, and always a logbook. Every suspicious activity was recorded. Every night was a report. The watchers created a record that would become a testimony of what was happening beneath respectable Edinburgh. It happened about 6 weeks into Begbie's watch. 2 men entered the graveyard near midnight. They moved with practiced efficiency, too practiced for amateurs. They knew which graves to target. They had tools. They had a system. What they didn't know was that someone was watching from above. By winter 1828, Edinburgh's watchers had created something unexpected, a community. Men like Begbie began meeting, comparing notes, discussing tactics. They shared information about where the body snatchers were operating. They warned each other. They formed a sort of underground police force with no official authorization, no official training, and no legal protection. But something else was happening in the darkness. The body snatchers began to understand that the watchers could be neutralized, not through violence, but negotiation. A fresh corpse was worth 10 shillings to the surgeons. A watcher earned that a week. That means a bribe could be worth more than a week's wages, and some watchers began to listen. Word spread quickly among the watchers. Some of their colleagues had been bought. Trust fractured. Now, a watcher couldn't be sure if the man working the next tower was an ally or an agent of the body snatchers. The network that had seemed unified began to fragment. The strength came from unity. Fragmentation meant weakness. Another defensive strategy was being developed during the day. Mort safes, great iron cages designed to be placed over coffins and graves. They were heavy, complex, and ingenious. A coffin locked within a morte-safe framework couldn't be moved. It couldn't be pried open. The dead had become locked in their own cages. But the body snatchers adapted. When morte-safes appeared, they developed new techniques. They learned to dig around the sides instead of the top. They created specialized tools. They developed countermeasures for countermeasures. This wasn't a crime being stopped. It was an escalating arms race, with the dead as the only real casualties. Watching the graves was destroying the watchers. Thomas Begbie, who had started as an ordinary man taking an ordinary job, was becoming someone else. 12 hours every night in the cold, always vigilant, never sleeping fully. Knowing that lapses in attention meant violation of the dead and betrayal of his community, the toll was visible on his face, in his hands, in his eyes. By 1829, the Watchers had developed a code. They would protect each other. They would share information about body snatchers. They would confront them when necessary. But they would do it on their terms, with the authority they had granted themselves. They had become something else, a force unto themselves. In November 1828, everything changed. William Burke was arrested for murders that would reveal the true depth of the violation. 16 people murdered to supply the medical schools. The body snatcher trade wasn't just theft, it was systematic killing. The trial exposed something the Watchers had suspected. The corruption ran deep. Some people knew, some chose not to know, but the system itself was built on murder. The Watchers were called to testify. They became witnesses not just to the grave robbing, but to the entire system of exploitation. Their meticulous logbooks, the same records that had once been merely documentation, became evidence in court. The private war they had been waging in darkness became public history. The scandal of Burke and Hare, combined with the visible struggle of the Watchers, forced a reckoning. Parliament began to consider the Anatomy Act. The idea was radical. Instead of allowing only executed criminals' bodies to be dissected, the law would allow the bodies of the poor, the unclaimed dead, to be available to medical schools. It was meant to eliminate the market for body snatchers by making supply legal. By early 1832, the threat had diminished. The trial of Burke and Hare had terrified the grave robbers. The network of Watchers had proven effective. The Anatomy Act was being debated and would be passed. The age of the Watchers was coming to an end. In March 1832, the Anatomy Act became law. The body-snatching trade collapsed. There was no longer need to steal what society had agreed to provide. The Watchers dispersed. Some went back to their previous lives. Some tried to find new work. Thomas Begbie lived another 40 years after his watching ended, but the years in the tower had changed him. He never spoke much about it. He never claimed hero status. He simply had been there, doing what needed to be done during a time when society had abandoned its responsibility for protecting the dead. The new Calton Watchtower stands to this day. It has been renovated, studied, made into a historical attraction. But most people who pass it don't know what it was built for. They see a curious piece of architecture. They don't see the desperation that created it or the men who stood in the darkness watching. The morte-safes tell a different story. Some parishes removed them after 1832. Others left them in place, evidence of a time when families had needed to cage their dead to protect them from violation. They became symbols, relics, unintended monuments to a dark chapter of Scottish history. Some were turned into water troughs by farmers. Some were preserved and studied. All of them are testimony. The Anatomy Act of 1832 solved the problem of grave robbing by legalizing the provision of bodies. For the next century, unclaimed bodies from poorhouses and hospitals would become standard dissection material. The Watchers had protected the graves of people who could afford them. The bodies of the poor would become educational material, with or without consent. The solution simply legitimized what had been criminal. The Watchers of Edinburgh's graveyards were paid 10 shillings a week, enough to feed a family, but not enough to live with dignity. They were hired at the last moment when crisis demanded, and discarded when the crisis passed. They were not memorialized. They received no medals. History did not mark their service. But for a critical period, roughly 1827 to 1832, they stood between the dead and violation. They created systems that worked. They documented crimes that would have otherwise remained invisible. They forced society to confront a problem it wanted to ignore, and then they disappeared back into obscurity. Today, we have different systems: electronic surveillance, police patrols, legal frameworks for body protection. The problem of grave robbing is largely solved. The need for night watchers in cemeteries has passed, but the legacy remains in what was built, in what was learned, in what was witnessed and documented. The towers stand, the mortsafes remain, and somewhere, someone is still watching, not to prevent violation now, but to preserve memory. The Night Sentinels of Edinburgh proved something fundamental, that vigilance, when applied with integrity, can protect the vulnerable. That ordinary people, when trusted with responsibility, will answer the call. That the dead deserve protection and the living bear responsibility for providing it. This is the history of those who watched. This is the legacy of the towers. This is why the Night Sentinels of Edinburgh matter, not because they were heroes, but because they were human and they chose to bear witness. They called it burking. You wouldn't hear it coming. Each body, each murder, all to supply Edinburgh's anatomy schools. When the authorities finally caught them, one confession unlocked countless murders. This is the scandal that would forever change how we source medical cadavers. Winter 1828. You live in a single freezing room with your wife and 3 children. The rent is overdue. Your daughter is very sick. There's no work, no food, no hope. This is how desperation begins. A well-dressed man approaches you in a filthy tavern. He's a surgeon's assistant. He felt you were a desperate man. That is why he approached you. He speaks quietly. £5 for a fresh corpse, delivered tonight. No questions. £5 could feed your family for 2 months. You have until midnight. You've never done this before. You wait outside the graveyard until the watchman finishes his rounds. The gates are locked, but the walls are low. Your hands shake as you climb over. You tell yourself, it's just a body. The dead don't need it anymore. You and your partner dig your first grave in silence. You knew someone as desperate as you to join you. The dirt is frozen. Every scrape of the shovel sounds deafening. You hit wood. The coffin is cheap pine. It cracks easily. Inside, a young woman. She's been dead 3 days. She's heavier than you thought. Dead weight. You wrap her in canvas and drag her through the mud. Her head lolls. Her skin is cold as marble. You don't look at her face. You can't. The surgeon's assistant meets you at the anatomy school's rear entrance. He doesn't speak. He just opens the sack, nods, and hands you £5 in coins. The door slams shut. You split the money, £2, 10 shillings. Your daughter eats meat that night. Word spreads among the surgeons. You're reliable, discreet. The medical schools are desperate. The law only allows them to dissect executed criminals, but there aren't enough hangings. So they pay men like you. You dig again, and again, it becomes routine. You learn the tricks. Dig from the head, it's faster. Use a wooden spade, it's quieter. Bribe the gravedigger to tell you who died yesterday. Target the poor. Their graves have no guards. You get good at this. Too good. The wealthy start protecting their dead. Iron mort safes are bolted over fresh graves. Watchtowers go up in cemeteries. Armed guards patrol at night. You adapt. You wait longer. You travel to rural churchyards where no one's watching. One night, you pry open a coffin and find rocks. It's a trap. Torches flare in the distance. Dogs bark. Men shout. You run. Your partner isn't fast enough. They catch him. 7 years hard labor. You never see him again. You need a new partner. You meet a man in a boarding house. His name is William. He's quiet, cold, empty eyes. He suggests something you've thought but never said aloud. Why dig up the dead when we can make our own supply? You find a drunk man passed out in an alley. William kneels beside him, places a hand over his mouth, and presses a small pillow he brought over his face. No struggle, no sound. The man stops breathing. William calls it burking. No marks, no blood. You sell the body for £8. Fresh is worth more. You tell yourself he would have died anyway, frozen to death, liver failure. You didn't kill him, you just accelerated the inevitable. The surgeons don't ask questions, they just pay. You do it again the next week, then the week after. You choose carefully. Drifters, prostitutes, the homeless, people no one will miss. William does the killing, you do the carrying, the money piles up. You move your family to a better room. Your daughter feels better. You sleep less. The next victim is a beggar, an old woman, blind. She trusts William when he offers her shelter. She dies in the room. You carry her out in a sack at dawn. The surgeons pay £12. She's the freshest yet. You buy your wife a new dress. She doesn't ask where the money came from. William brings a child, maybe 12, ragged clothes, big eyes. He says the boy saw too much. You hesitate. This is different. But William reminds you, you're already a murderer 15 times over. One more won't matter. You help him carry the sack. You don't sleep that night. A medical student recognizes the boy's face on the dissection table. He was a street vendor. Everyone knew him. The student tells the professor. The professor alerts the police. They search the school. They find your sacks. The police finds William. He confesses immediately. He gives them your name. They come for you at dawn. You don't run. Where would you go? Your wife screams. Your children cry. The neighbors spit at you as you're dragged through the streets. The mob wants blood. The courtroom is packed. There is a crowd gathered outside screaming for your death. The evidence is overwhelming. 20 murders confirmed. William gets life in prison for testifying against you. You get the rope. The judge calls you a stain on humanity. You don't disagree. They hang you in the grass market. The crowd cheers as you drop. And then, the final insult. Your body is given to the surgeons. You, the body snatcher, are dissected in front of medical students. Your skin is tanned into leather for bookbinding. Your skeleton is displayed in a museum. It's still there today. Room 11, Surgeons' Hall, Edinburgh. A warning, a trophy, a punchline to a joke you never got to hear.